Now, this is not as complicated as it looks. At least we're not going to talk about all the permutations. This is actually a simplified representation of the three main layers. I mentioned infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service. Again, apologies to the real techies in the room. This is a simplification. Infrastructure, as the name suggests, is hardware. It's the physical kit. It's the machines, the servers, the basic physical environment that you get in a data center, power supplies and all that kind of stuff. But really not much intelligence, not much software. Although there may be some very basic stuff you need to manage a dynamic public cloud environment. So hypervisor software, again, ask our techie later if you want to know how that works. Platform as a service is a level of complexity up from that, and it's likely to be not just hardware, but hardware with an operating system, a complete operating environment, in fact, that you can then run your applications on, perhaps even store your data on, but it's a level of complexity above. And just to give you some examples of infrastructure service, the largest player in the market is probably Amazon Web Services, not just because it directly runs a huge cloud operation that it sells services on itself, but it provides the infrastructure for many popular cloud services out there. Some of you may even use a Dropbox, and you may think you're trusting your data to Dropbox. Well, you're not. You're trusting it to Amazon Web Services, and that's true for many other popular cloud services. Whereas a platform as a service could be something like Microsoft Windows Azure, which instead of loading Windows onto your laptop, you're basically running Windows in the cloud, or Google App Engine, I suppose, is another example of a platform. There are many more. Software as a service is the most complex, most sophisticated. It's a fully configured service that will actually do stuff for you, like do your store all your sales documentation or your HR process stuff. And examples include your basic Office apps, so things like Google Apps and Microsoft Office 365, and Salesforce for CRM and HR. Those are all examples of software as a service. So have that in mind as we get to our discussion in a minute about doing deals in this area. Now, this is the last slide I'm going to present, actually. A number of people have told me, and it seems that a number of regulators in the EU and elsewhere have assumed that cloud is just another type of outsourcing. Therefore, the principles that we've worked out over decades, actually, as to how you apply data protection laws to this kind of stuff will be just the same as outsourcing. I personally don't agree with that, and I'll tell you why. There is a link to a more substantive paper on this, but a brief summary. The reasons I don't agree with this, and I'll put them all up. Key differences are active versus passive, direction of travel and sequence of events, standardized shared infrastructure, and differences in type and degree of user control. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, a traditional outsourcing deal, and again, I do apologize for the heavy-duty outsourcing lawyers in the room. I could see a few of them, lower, middle, and upper ranks, I would say, to use Stuart's kind of terminology. But traditional outsourcing deals tend to be big and complicated, and they're staffed by lots of people, including not just the technology people, but the business process people, and everybody with any interest in risk, which includes the legal department and the compliance people and the privacy professionals and the insurance people. And typically, the deal itself can take months to negotiate. In fact, in extreme cases, you might even be looking at years. The deal then, once you get the documentation stack like this, gets locked down for maybe 5 years, 7 years. It'll have complex change control provisions in it, typically, and very complex exit provisions. And given that at least half of these deals fail, those bits are quite important. Now, the data protection bits of it, quite well tried and tested. The idea is that the customer, which might be a company or a government department, has typically a business process, and it might be a simple IT outsourcing and more complex business process outsourcing, but in either case, they already have something that they're doing themselves. And they often have equipment, and they often have people, and they often have business processes, and they want to outsource that to an external service provider, which might be EDS, IBM, Accenture, many of the other names you're familiar with. But the important things to bear in mind are, this is something that already exists and already happens that's going out of the organization. Contrast that with a lot of cloud procurement, often people are now buying cloud services to do things that they're not doing already. Or even if they're doing something similar, they might completely scrap what they're doing already and start buying a cloud utility service. So they're not going to go along and negotiate with the sort of companies I just mentioned and say, would you take over our data centers and all of our computers and all of our people and all of our business process? And of course, you can do a bit of business process re-engineering for us, but we're basically shifting all this stuff to you. That's not how cloud works. Typically, cloud is something that's already been built. It's a commoditized service. Although you might have some scope, if you're big enough to do so or strategic enough as a potential customer, there may be some scope to negotiate some of the terms, and you're going to see how that happens in a minute. For most cloud users, this is a completely standard, commoditized, take it or leave it, off-the-shelf option.